Jean Kambanda was the Prime Minister of Rwanda during the 1994 genocide, one of the most devastating atrocities in modern history. He assumed office on April 9, 1994, just 2 days after the Rwandan president's plane was shot down, an event that triggered mass violence across the country. Over the course of approximately 100 days, extremist militias and civilians targeted ethnic Tutsis and moderate Hutus, resulting in the deaths of between 500,000 and 1 million people. Though Kambanda was appointed during a time of national crisis, evidence later revealed that he was not merely a figurehead. He chaired meetings of the Council of Ministries, where the strategy and logistics of the killings were openly discussed. He also used government platforms, including radio broadcasts, to promote hatred and encourage violence. For example, Kambanda publicly described the genocide as a necessary defense against enemies of the state and supported its execution through various forms of state-sponsored messaging. After the Rwandan Patriotic Front took control in July 1994, Kambanda fled the country. He was captured in Kenya in 1997 and later transferred to the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, located in Tanzania. In 1998, Jean Kambanda made history as the first former head of government to plead guilty to genocide. He admitted to genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, incitement, and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to life in prison, noting that despite his cooperation, the gravity of his crimes required the harshest available punishment. His appeal in 2000 was denied, and his life sentence was upheld. Kambanda is currently serving his sentence in Koulikoro Central Prison in Mali. Augusto Pinochet came to power in Chile on September 11, 1973, through a military coup that overthrew the democratically elected president, Salvador Allende. Pinochet, who was the army commander at the time, claimed the coup was necessary to prevent a Marxist takeover and to restore national order. From that moment, he ruled Chile as a military dictator until 1990. During his rule, political repression became widespread and brutal. Thousands of people were arrested, tortured, or killed, especially those linked to left-wing movements and labor unions. According to official investigations conducted years later, over 3,000 people were either killed or disappeared, and approximately 40,000 were tortured. Many of these abuses happened in secret detention centers, where victims were subjected to beatings, electric shocks, sexual violence, and in some cases, thrown from helicopters into the sea. By the mid-1980s, economic instability and social unrest led to increased protests. In 1998, a national vote forced Pinochet to step down, though he remained head of the military until 1998 and later became a lifetime senator, a position he had created for himself. In 1998, Pinochet was arrested in London following an international warrant from Spain, with this being one of the first times a former head of state was detained abroad for human rights crimes. Although he avoided a full trial in Chile due to poor health, his arrest had a global impact and opened the door for similar prosecutions worldwide. Pinochet died in 2006 without ever being convicted. Even today, Chile continues to deal with the legal and political consequences of his dictatorship. Slobodan Milošević was the president of Syria and later Yugoslavia during a period defined by some of the most violent conflicts in post-World War II Europe. He came to national power in 1990, promoting Serbian nationalism and resisting political reforms. Using state-controlled media and strong rhetoric, he consolidated support by presenting himself as a defender of the Serbian people. Milošević played a central role in the violent breakup of Yugoslavia. He remained in power throughout the wars in Croatia from 1991 to 1995, in Bosnia from 1992 to 1995, and in Kosovo from 1998 to 1999. During these conflicts, Serbian forces and allied paramilitary groups were widely accused of war crimes, specifically ethnic cleansing. In Bosnia alone, approximately 200,000 people were killed, while in Kosovo, over 800,000 ethnic Albanians were forced from their homes. In May 1999, while the Kosovo War was still ongoing, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia indicted Milošević. He became the first sitting head of state to be charged with war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide by an international court. The charges included his involvement in violence across multiple countries and his alleged orchestration of mass killings and deportations. Milošević remained defiant and rejected all accusations. In 2000, following a disputed election and massive public protest known as the Bulldozer Revolution, he was forced to resign. In April 2001, Serbian authorities arrested him, and by June he was transferred to The Hague to stand trial before the International Tribunal. He chose to defend himself in court. The prosecution presented evidence including documents, intercepted communications, and witness testimonials. The trial lasted nearly 4 years and was one of the most complex cases in international legal history. Milošević frequently claimed that he was a victim of political persecution, and he often disrupted proceedings with speeches. On March 11, 2006, before a final verdict could be delivered, Milošević died of a heart attack in his detention cell. Although the case was never completed, later verdicts in related trials confirmed that he had participated in a joint criminal enterprise responsible for ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, Croatia, and Kosovo. Jacob Zuma is one of South Africa's most controversial political figures. In 1963, Zuma was arrested for conspiracy against the apartheid government and spent 10 years in prison on Robben Island alongside other ANC leaders. After his release, he operated in exile for several years before returning to South Africa in 1990 during the country's transition away from apartheid. Zuma became deputy president in 1999. However, his tenure was quickly clouded by scandal. In 2005, his close associate and financial advisor was convicted of corruption. The court found that Zuma had an improper relationship with him, raising serious concerns about his conduct. That same year, Zuma was charged with forced non-consensual sex. Although he was acquitted in 2006, his statements during the trial, including remarks about HIV, sparked public outrage. Despite his legal troubles, Zuma gained strong support within the ANC and eventually became president in 2009. His presidency was dominated by controversy. In 2016, South Africa's Constitutional Court ruled that he had used public funds improperly to renovate his private residence. He was ordered to repay millions back to the state. Even more damaging was the issue of state capture. A wealthy business family, the Guptas, were accused of using their relationship with Zuma to influence government decisions and access state contracts. This led to a judicial inquiry known as the Zondo Commission, which documented extensive corruption during his presidency. Zuma resigned in 2018 under pressure. In 2021, he was sentenced to 15 months in prison for refusing to testify before the Zondo Commission. His arrest led to widespread unrest and riots that killed over 300 people. He also faces separate corruption charges tied to a 1999 arms deal. This trial is still ongoing. Saddam Hussein was the president of Iraq from 1979 to 2003. He became one of the most feared leaders in modern Middle Eastern history. One of Saddam's most brutal campaigns was against the Kurdish population in northern Iraq. In 1988, Iraqi forces carried out mass killings, forced relocations, and chemical attacks. One of the most horrific events occurred in a Kurdish town, where chemical weapons were used to kill around 5,000 civilians. The use of these weapons was later widely condemned as a war crime. Saddam was also responsible for violent repression within Iraq. In 1982, after a failed assassination attempt on him, he ordered the execution of 148 Shiite men and boys. In addition, their homes and farmlands were destroyed, and many families were forced into exile. After the 2003 United States-led invasion of Iraq, Saddam fled but was captured in December near his hometown. He was later held at a detention center, where he was questioned by the FBI. In 2005, he was put on trial by the Iraqi High Tribunal for crimes against humanity. The court heard evidence including documents signed by Saddam, eyewitness testimonies, and details of torture and mass executions. However, international observers raised concerns about the fairness of the trial. Human rights organizations criticized the lack of proper legal procedures, political pressure, and limited protection for lawyers and judges. On November 5, 2006, Saddam Hussein was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. He was executed on December 30, 2006. Alberto Fujimori served as president of Peru from 1990 to 2000, a period defined by both dramatic reforms and major controversies. In 1992, Fujimori staged a self-coup, a move where he dissolved the Peruvian Congress and suspended the constitution with backing from the military. This allowed him to govern without legislative oversight. Many viewed it as authoritarian, while others believed it was necessary to carry out urgent reforms and fight acts of terror more effectively. On the economic front, Fujimori implemented policies that brought inflation under control. In terms of security, Fujimori's government aggressively targeted insurgent groups of the Shining Path leader. However, the government's tactics were often harsh and led to widespread human rights abuses. Death squads carried out extrajudicial killings of civilians. Two notable incidents were the Barrios Altos massacre, in which 15 people were killed, and the La Cantuta massacre, where 9 students and a professor were abducted and killed. Fujimori's presidency ended abruptly in 2000 amid a corruption scandal involving his intelligence chief. Evidence showed bribery of politicians and media outlets. Fujimori fled to Japan, from where he faxed his resignation. In 2005, he traveled to Chile, was arrested, and extradited to Peru in 2007. In 2009, Fujimori was convicted of human rights violations and corruption. He received a 25-year sentence, with this being the first time a democratically elected Latin American president was convicted in his own country for such crimes. In 2017, he received a pardon from President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski on health grounds. The pardon was controversial, sparking protests and legal challenges. The Supreme Court later revoked it, but Peru's Constitutional Tribunal reinstated the decision in 2022. Human rights groups in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights expressed concern, arguing that such pardons should not apply to serious crimes. Fujimori was released from prison again in 2023. While some credit him with saving Peru from economic disaster and insurgency, others see him as a leader who abused power and weakened democratic institutions. Charles Gankay Taylor served as president of Liberia from 1997 to 2003. His rise to power came through armed rebellion, but his legacy is defined by civil war, widespread atrocities, and a historic war crimes conviction. He held a government position during the regime of President Samuel Doe. After being accused of embezzlement, Taylor fled the country and eventually formed the National Patriotic Front of Liberia. In December 1989, he launched an armed rebellion against President Doe. This attack sparked Liberia's first civil war, a brutal conflict that lasted for several years and resulted in the deaths of over 200,000 people. Taylor's rebel group gained notoriety for committing mass killings, sexual violence, torture, and the forced recruitment of child soldiers. His forces terrorized civilians and used mutilation as a means of control. Liberia's Truth and Reconciliation Commission later documented over 60,000 violations attributed to Taylor and allied factions. While fighting for control in Liberia, Taylor also played a central role in destabilizing neighboring Sierra Leone. He supported the Revolutionary United Front, a rebel group known for horrific crimes including amputations, forced non-consensual sex, and mass executions. In return, Taylor received so-called blood diamonds, which he used to fund his military operations. Despite this, Taylor won Liberia's 1997 presidential election. His campaign slogan was, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him." Many believed voting for him would bring peace. However, under his rule, violence and repression continued. In 1998, his forces crushed opposition groups. By 2003, a second civil war had broken out. Under international pressure and facing growing resistance, Taylor resigned and went into exile in Nigeria. In 2006, he was arrested and transferred to the Special Court for Sierra Leone, a United Nations-backed tribunal. Taylor was charged with 11 counts, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and violations of international law. In April 2012, Taylor was found guilty of aiding atrocities. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison and is currently serving his term in the United Kingdom. Germain Katanga was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He rose to prominence as a militia leader during the brutal Ituri conflict in the early 2000s, leading the Patriotic Resistance Force in Ituri. Katanga commanded fighters mainly from the Ngiti ethnic group. The Bagoro attack was one of the most horrific events in the conflict. At least 200 civilians were killed in a raid that began before dawn. Fighters used machetes, guns, and fire to destroy the village. Witnesses later described how survivors were locked inside rooms already filled with corpses. Women and girls were abducted and used as sexual slaves, while children were forcibly recruited to become fighters. Homes were looted and burned, leaving survivors homeless and traumatized. In 2004, the Congolese government referred the situation in Ituri to the International Criminal Court. In July 2007, the court issued an arrest warrant for Katanga. He was charged with 6 war crimes and 3 crimes against humanity. These charges included acts of killing, attacks on civilians, pillaging, and using child soldiers. Katanga surrendered to the ICC in October 2007. His trial began in November 2009, and on March 7, 2014, the ICC found Katanga guilty of 5 charges. The judges ruled that while he may not have led the attack directly, he played a critical role in enabling it. In May 2014, Katanga was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The court took into account the time he had already spent in detention. He was later transferred to a prison in the Democratic Republic of Congo in December 2015. to serve the remainder of his sentence. Radovan Karadžić was a central figure during the Bosnian War and was later convicted for some of the worst crimes committed in Europe since World War II. In 1990, he co-founded the Serb Democratic Party and quickly became one of the most influential voices of Serb nationalism in Bosnia. In 1992, Karadžić became president, and under his leadership, Bosnian Serb forces carried out widespread ethnic cleansing campaigns against Bosniak and Croat populations. His military strategy aimed to create a Serb-only territory through forced removals, massacres, and mass detentions. Karadžić was also closely aligned to the siege of Sarajevo, which lasted from 1992 to 1996. During this time, Serb forces surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and repeatedly shelling residential areas, schools, and hospitals. Thousands of civilians were killed, and many more were injured or forced to flee. One of the most horrific events associated with Karadžić was the Srebrenica massacre of July 1995. Over 8,000 Muslim men and boys were executed by Serb forces after the United Nations declared safe zones was overrun. This massacre was later classified as genocide by both the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Court of Justice. In July 1995, the ICTY indicted Karadžić for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. After being removed from power in 1996, he disappeared and lived in hiding for more than a decade. Using the alias Dragan Dabić, he lived openly in Serbia and even practiced alternative medicine until his arrest in July 2008. Karadžić was transferred to The Hague, where his trial began in 2009. The proceedings lasted several years and involved extensive evidence, including eyewitness testimony, documents, and intercepted communications. In March 2016, the tribunal found him guilty of 10 out of 11 charges, including genocide, persecution, killing, deportation, and terror against civilians. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. On appeal, the sentence was increased to life imprisonment in 2019. The judges ruled that the original sentence did not reflect the scale and gravity of the crimes. In 2021, Karadžić was transferred to a prison in the United Kingdom to serve his sentence. Ratko Mladić was the military commander of the Bosnian Serb forces during the Bosnian War between 1992 and 1995. He played a leading role in some of the most horrific acts committed during the conflict. He had a long career in the Yugoslav People's Army, and when the country began to break apart in the early 1990s, he became the top general. Mladić was one of the key figures responsible for the sieges of Sarajevo and Srebrenica. In 1995, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia indicted Mladić for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. He evaded capture for 16 years, living in hiding within Serbia, and reportedly protected by allies in government and the military. In May 2011, Serbian authorities arrested him and extradited him to The Hague for trial. His trial began in 2012 and included testimony from hundreds of witnesses, photographs of mass graves, and intercepted communications. On November 22, 2017, Mladić was convicted on 10 of 11 charges, including genocide and persecution. He was sentenced to life in prison. Today, Ratko Mladić is serving his life sentence in a detention facility in The Hague. Park Geun-hye made history in 2012 by becoming the first woman to be elected president of South Korea. She was already well known to the public and the daughter of former President Park Chung-hee, who led South Korea for 18 years. Park Geun-hye entered politics in the late 1990s, eventually serving 5 terms in the National Assembly before running for president. Her early presidency was defined by strong approval ratings and promises of economic reform. However, public support declined after a major national tragedy in 2014. A ferry sank off the country's southwestern coast, killing over 300 people, most of them being high school students. The government was criticized for its slow and poorly coordinated rescue efforts, which caused widespread anger and grief. Park's presidency took a more serious turn in 2016 when a corruption scandal broke out involving her longtime friend and advisor, Choi Soon-sil. Investigations revealed that Choi, who held no official government position, had gained secret access to presidential speeches and state documents. She also used her connection to the president to pressure large companies, such as Samsung, to donate millions of dollars to 2 private foundations under her control. The scandal sparked mass protests across the country, with millions demanding Park's resignation. In December 2016, the National Assembly voted to impeach her. The decision was later upheld by the Constitutional Court in March 2017. officially removing her from office. It was the first time a South Korean president had been removed through impeachment. Shortly after her dismissal, Park was arrested and charged with a long list of crimes, including bribery, coercion, abuse of power, and leaking classified information. Her trial lasted nearly a year and involved extensive evidence showing that she had allowed Choi to interfere in state matters and accepted briberies from major business groups. In 2018, she was sentenced to 24 years in prison and fined 18 billion won. A later trial added more years to her sentence based on additional charges, specifically misuse of government funds from the National Intelligence Service. At one point, her total prison term reached 25 years. In 2020, the sentence was slightly reduced to 20 years, and the Supreme Court upheld that decision in 2021. Despite the severity of the charges, Park was granted a presidential pardon in December 2021. The decision was made on humanitarian grounds due to her declining health, and with the aim of promoting national unity. She was released at the end of the year and returned home in early 2022. Omar Al-Bashir was the president of Sudan from 1989 to 2019. He came to power through a military coup that removed the elected government and quickly established an authoritarian regime. His presidency is most widely associated with the violent conflict in the Darfur region, which began in 2003 in response to attacks by rebel groups who accused the government of neglecting and discriminating against non-Arab populations. Al-Bashir's government launched a brutal counterinsurgency campaign. This involved the Sudanese military and allied militias. Reports from international organizations documented widespread atrocities, including mass killings, sexual violence, looting, and the forced displacement of entire villages. In 2009, the International Criminal Court issued its first arrest warrant for al-Bashir, charging him with war crimes and crimes against humanity. These charges included killing, extermination, torture, and forced non-consensual sex. A second warrant was issued in 2010, adding charges of genocide. This was the first time the ICC charged a sitting head of state with genocide. Sudan was not a member of the ICC, but the United Nations Security Council gave the court jurisdiction over Darfur in 2005 through a formal resolution. Despite the warrants, al-Bashir continued to travel internationally for years. Several countries, including ICC member states, refused to arrest him during official visits, raising questions about global enforcement of international law. Domestically, his government remained resistant to handing him over. However, in 2019, following months of widespread protest over economic hardship and political repression, the Sudanese military removed al-Bashir from power. He was arrested and imprisoned in Sudan on charges of corruption and other domestic crimes. In 2020, Sudan's transitional government announced it was willing to cooperate with the ICC. While al-Bashir remained in Sudanese custody, discussions about transferring him to The Hague continued. As of 2025, the handover has not yet taken place, but international pressure remains high. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure you leave a like. Comment down below your thoughts on any of the political criminals I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you would like to see a part 2 or more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.